all the polls suggest that Rishi Sunak is heading for a large iceberg at the next general election, but that doesn't mean to say now isn't a good time to rearrange some of his desk chairs. He's expected to have a mini reshuffle today and to want to restructure some of his departments, tying a couple of the deck chairs together, if you like. Let's talk to Alex Thomas, the Programme Director at the Institute for Government and a former Principal Private Secretary to the Head of the Civil Service. He joins us now. Good morning, Alex.
Morning, Stig.
Shall we start on the restructure? It seems to affect two departments in particular. What sort of thing might Rishi Sunak be going for here?
Yes, and it's worth saying, I mean, I'm not expecting many voters to be following this in great detail, but it's worth saying from what's been briefed out, it does sound like in the world of machinery of government changes and reshuffles, or machinery of government changes as we call them, this is quite big news. So it looks like we might be going from three departments: the business department that also includes energy, Department of Digital, Culture and Media and Sport, and the Department of International Trade, to four departments, which is an energy department, a business and trade department, so getting rid of the Department of International Trade, some sort of culture and sport department, and then science and digital departments. But let's see, because there are lots of unanswered questions in this. Where does media go? Does climate change go along with energy, and so on? So we're going to have to wait for the detail to really know what we think about this.
Yeah, it struck me that's an interesting question on media. Well, obviously, I'm biased to have an interest in that, because you could put media in business, you could put it in digital, or you could put it in culture, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And it's obviously been alongside culture and sport for quite a long time now, but it's really grown. The Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport has absolutely rocketed in size over the course of the last 5 or 10 years as that sector has become more important. So, there's always a good argument for making these sorts of changes, but we're going to have to see where digital goes. I think the other one, I mentioned it briefly there, that I would pick out, it would be very odd not to keep climate change alongside energy. Again, let's see what happens. But in all this talk of creating a Department of Energy, there are some real links between the climate and energy agenda, obviously. So, to my mind, it would make sense to keep those two together.
And what are the good arguments then? Because I want to talk about the actual practicalities of this, because I think that could be of concern to some people. But what are they? Why would you? I mean, in some ways, business and trade do seem to go together. Energy and climate change do seem to go together. Digital and science seem to. So there seems to be a sort of underlying logic here.
Yeah, I think you've just made the case in that, very succinctly there. So, government can always be organised in all sorts of different ways, and it's really about where you want the pinch-offs, where you want the kind of trade-offs to be, and where you want the links to be emphasised. And the way you set it out there does make sense. I think the fact that there has been, there's been so much focus on energy bills, and that's been just one part of the business department. There's been so much focus on growth, and that's been to some extent overwhelmed by talk of energy costs and energy supply. There is a logic to all of this. All that said, and you mentioned the practicalities there, it is rare that a machinery of government change really makes a difference and is actually worth the cost of making that change. So there are some changes that have sustained. The Department for Work and Pensions was probably worth doing. The creation of DEFRA after the foot and mouth outbreak, and the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food hadn't done so well in that in 2001. So it is sometimes worth making these changes, but I would really emphasise the cost. We did some work a few years ago that suggests, just in bare terms, it costs 15 to 20 million pounds to make these, even a very simple merger or a change of a department. But that pales into insignificance when you compare all the human resources costs, the costs of merging the IT systems, the HR systems. Everybody's on different pay structures. The emails. We've seen with the merger of the Foreign Office and the Department for International Development just how long it can take to bed these things in. So I would not underestimate just how much disruption this will cause inside the kind of cogs of Whitehall. And of course, this is a Prime Minister who may only have 18 months or so before the next general election. He doesn't have much choice about his timing here, but it is, all other things being equal, you wouldn't make a big machinery of government change in the year or two before a general election.
Because we're talking about we're talking about opportunity cost here, aren't we? Because the effort that the civil service gets a bad rap, particularly by this government. It seemed to be a bit woolly, a bit soft, not very good at delivery, constantly suffering from delays. There's the whole issue of the working culture at the civil service as well, whether they should be working at home or in the office. The evidence of the Foreign Office merger, as you say, some people argued that when Afghanistan happened, things weren't quite in a good enough shape to be able to deal with them. This feels like a lot of downside for a relatively ephemeral upside.
Yes, and I think for all the logic of the reorganisation that we were talking about at the moment, on balance, I would say it's probably not the time to do this because of all of that disruption. I mean, you said civil service gets a bad rap, perhaps a bit less from this Sunak-led government than from some of the predecessor governments, but we'll see. And there are all sorts of legitimate criticisms you can make of the kind of bureaucracy of government. Is it too risk averse? Does it do some things too slowly? And so on. But actually, if you're a civil servant trying to make and implement policy in a constantly changing bureaucratic kind of environment, it's going to be harder for you to do that than it would be otherwise. So there's a logic to this, but probably, let's see, the downsides will outweigh the upsides, and certainly it's not going to win many votes.
Will it just finally then, could you see it changing a policy? In that if business is purely focused on business and trade, if, I don't know, digital, I mean, the online harms bill presumably goes to the digital and science section, maybe, is there more? Could you point the fact that there could be a policy change as a result of this, where one policy, one area is focused upon more in government than otherwise?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. It's partly a reflection of policy. So Rishi Sunak wants to say, I want to prioritise energy. I want to prioritise growth. Therefore, I'm going to organise my government in order to do this. So to one extent, it's a reflection of a policy decision that's already been taken. In another slightly more kind of subtle sense, when you create new institutions, they generate their own momentum. So if we have a look at the creation of DEXU, the Department for Exiting the European Union, or the Department for International Trade, the very existence of those departments created a Secretary of State around the cabinet table who needed to show that they were getting on with their job, that they were being successful, they were achieving. I mean, none more so than Liz Truss being International Trade Secretary. She needed to show that she was generating momentum around the rollover trade agreements and some of the other trade deals. That had a genuine impact on the trade deal that was signed with Australia, for example, because she was putting huge pressure on the system to sign that trade deal, when, as we know from George Eustice, the former Agriculture Secretary, there was quite a lot of resistance in the system there.
And actually, it led to her being Prime Minister, potentially, as well. So it was sliding
historical significance.
Yeah, sliding doors below. But Alex, really interesting stuff. Thank you for bringing that to life for us. That's Alex Thomas, Programme Director at the Institute for Government